Welcome to the Faith-Based Christian Channel.
Jesus asked, "Can ye not discern the signs of the times?"
Subscribe to the Faith-Based Christian Channel today.
All right, today we're going to dive into what is, without a doubt, one of the oldest and toughest questions humanity has ever asked itself. It's something that has kept philosophers, theologians, and, well, pretty much everyone up at night for centuries. We're talking about the problem of pain. And here's the question at the heart of it all. You've probably thought about this yourself, right? If there is a God who is all good and all powerful, why is there so much suffering? I mean, it's everywhere, from these massive global tragedies you see on the news to the really personal private heartaches we all go through. So when you lay it out logically, it feels like a real head-scratcher. Step 1, an all-powerful God can prevent evil, right? He has the power. Step 2, an all-good God wants to prevent evil. That seems obvious. But then you get to step 3, and yet, evil and suffering are everywhere. They just exist. It feels like a perfect, airtight contradiction. And honestly, it's the reason a lot of people just conclude, well, a God like that can't possibly exist. Okay, so before we can even get into the possible answers, we need to understand what we're actually talking about. The sources are pretty helpful here. They kind of break down evil into a few different buckets. You've got moral evil. That's the stuff humans do to each other. You know, cruelty, war, all that. Then there's physical evil, which is more like sickness, natural disasters, things that happen to us. And there's even this idea of metaphysical evil, which is just the basic fact that the world isn't perfect, that it has limits. So how on earth have people tried to make sense of this? Well, the first major set of explanations we're going to look at all revolve around one big idea: freedom. And more importantly, the price that comes with it. Now, there's a technical term for this whole exercise, and it's going to be useful for us to know. It's called a theodicy. It comes from the Greek words for God and justice, and it's basically any attempt to justify why a good God would allow evil. It's a key idea for everything we're about to discuss. And when we're talking about explanations based on freedom, the source material points to three main frameworks. First, there's the big one, the free will theodicy. Then, there's the whole concept of the fall of man. And finally, the idea that maybe, just maybe, some suffering is a punishment for sin. Okay, so the free will theodicy is probably the most famous one. The argument goes like this: for our choices to be real, to actually mean something, we have to be able to choose the wrong thing. Think about it. If God made a world where it was impossible to do wrong, then our freedom would be a total illusion. It'd be like a puppet show. C.S. Lewis had a great way of putting it. Authentic love can't be forced. So, and this is the really crucial part, the risk of terrible evil is the unavoidable price you pay for the possibility of real, genuine good. Now, the idea of the fall kind of gives a story to how that free will first went wrong. It's the view that an original, catastrophic choice corrupted, well, everything. It suggests that this one act fundamentally broke something in creation, making us what some call a spoiled species, and letting all kinds of suffering and death into a world that wasn't designed for it. Then you have the punishment theodicy. The idea here is pretty straightforward. Sometimes suffering is a just penalty for doing wrong. It's meant to correct us or deter others. But this idea runs into a huge wall, doesn't it? I mean, maybe it makes sense for a criminal, but what about the suffering of a young child? It just completely fails to explain the pain of the innocent, and that's a massive moral problem for this view. All right, let's shift gears a bit. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if suffering isn't just some unfortunate byproduct of freedom? A whole other category of explanations suggests that maybe suffering, as awful as it is, can actually be a tool for achieving some kind of greater good. So, if suffering is a tool, what's it for? The sources point to three main possibilities. The first one is all about character development, sometimes called soul-making. The second is about how suffering can actually build stronger human relationships. And the third is a bit more mystical, the idea that pain can be a unique way to get closer to God. C.S. Lewis comes through again with this really powerful analogy. He says that God whispers to us when things are good, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. He calls it God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. The idea is that when everything is comfortable, it's easy to just tune out the big questions. But pain forces you to listen. So let's dig into that soul-making idea. The argument is that virtues like courage, compassion, patience, they don't really mean much unless you've earned them through struggle. They have to be forged in fire, so to speak. But this leads to a really obvious and tough question, right? Couldn't an all-powerful God just create us with all those virtues from the get-go? Why put us through all the horrific pain?
Another angle is that suffering is allowed because it helps build bonds between us. I mean, you've seen this happen. When a disaster strikes, you see communities come together in incredible ways. When you meet someone who's been through the same struggle you have, there's an instant connection. The idea here is that shared tragedy can forge this really powerful empathy that might not exist otherwise.
And then there's this last idea, which is really about divine intimacy. It's something you hear from mystics and deeply religious people throughout history. They often report that it was in their absolute worst moments, the depths of their pain, that they felt the most profound connection to God. It's a view that suggests suffering can unlock a kind of spiritual awareness that's just not available when life is easy. All right, for our third and final category of explanations, we have to completely change our perspective. We have to zoom way, way out and look at our suffering not just in the context of our lives, but in the context of, well, eternity. From this point of view, our world, our life here and now, is just a temporary stop. It's a state of journeying, not the final destination. And when you look at it that way, the sources suggest that even the most all-consuming pain we feel now can be seen as momentary when you compare it to an unending, eternal reality that's yet to come. And the ultimate promise here is one of total, complete restoration. The core belief is that the story of the universe isn't ending in chaos. It's heading towards a final chapter where, as the book of Revelation says, God will wipe every tear away. No more death, no more mourning, no more pain, because that whole old order of things will be gone for good. This whole line of thinking is often called the afterlife theodicy. The core idea is that the infinite joy of what comes next will be so immense that it will basically swamp our temporary finite suffering here on Earth. But you can see the ethical snag here, can't you? Is making things right later the same as justifying why the bad thing was allowed to happen in the first place? That's a really tough question. Okay, so where does all of this leave us? We've walked through this incredibly complex landscape of ideas. And let's be honest, every single one of them has its strengths, but also some really profound challenges. Just to recap the big picture, we've looked at three main paths: the idea that suffering is the price of freedom, the idea that it's a tool for our growth, and the idea that it's just a temporary part of a much bigger eternal story. But there's another perspective we need to consider, one that actually challenges this entire project. It's sometimes called the anti-theodicy critique. And it basically says that even trying to come up with a neat, tidy explanation for suffering is morally questionable. Why? Because you risk turning someone's real, gut-wrenching pain into a sterile philosophical puzzle. And in doing so, you might just be minimizing their reality. You know, this C.S. Lewis quote really hits that tension perfectly. He basically says that this old idea of being made perfect through suffering, it's not unbelievable. But trying to make it sound nice or easy to accept? No way. It's not his job to make it palatable. Because it isn't. And I think that leaves us with one last big question to ponder. When we're faced with real suffering, is the goal really to find that one perfect intellectual answer that solves the whole puzzle? Or is the real task something different? Is it about finding the meaning, the strength, and the hope to keep going, even when, and especially when, a complete answer is nowhere in sight?
Subscribe to the Faith-Based Christian channel today, and let's grow our faith together in these last days. The King is at the door.